Hi, we're the Wolff couple.
I'm Lynette.
And I'm Brian. Welcome to Secrets of Making Killer Closing Calls.
Step number 1 to making killer closing calls. Get your buyer or seller on the telephone.
So what do you have to do? You have to call during the best calling times. What have we found to be best calling times? Well, it's changed. It used to be that you would call people in the evening at their home or sometimes on the weekend. But now with the advent of cell phones, you can get people almost anywhere, almost any time.
That's
But
right.
the key is if you are calling someone on their cell phone, which is a great way to get a hold of a lot more people more quickly, so it works well, always make sure you ask one crucial question, because if they're driving down the freeway and you're trying to do your closing call and negotiate price and terms and everything like that, it's going to be very difficult for them to focus and understand what you're talking about. So always ask that question, do you have a couple minutes to talk right now?
That's a perfect question. Now also, you want to make sure that you're talking to the decision maker. Most of the times it's the one who responded to the ad. Now they're the person that you want to talk to because they're the ones that can make a decision. Even if there's two people that need to sign, you want to talk to the decision maker or both parties if possible.
That's a good point. And if you do have a husband and wife, it's good if they can even both be on the phone at the same time.
That's right.
Okay, if you have a divorce situation, then you're going to have to probably talk to them individually. But again, you're always looking to talk to the decision maker first.
Right. Step 2 to making killer closing calls. Build rapport. Now, first impressions make or break deals.
In fact, your customer, your buyer or seller, is deciding second by second whether to even keep talking to you or just to say not interested and hang up. Now, we've said before, and you remember, that the closing call is the most important 5 to 15 minutes out of the entire deal. And the most important part of that closing call is that 20 seconds to 2 minutes that you take to build rapport. Number 2, when you build rapport, everything goes so much smoother. Obviously, guys, we need our buyers and sellers to be a little flexible for some of the deals that we do. And sometimes you have to ask a tough question.
Yeah, like for instance, will you sell the house for what you owe on it?
Exactly. And then we also have to explain how the deals work, which some of the things, the way they work, may cause an objection. And I'm telling you, if you take that time to build rapport up front, every negotiation, every conversation, every time you talk to your seller and buyer, it'll go 1,000% better, easier, and smoother. Because they won't be pulling against you, fighting you. You guys will really be on the same team and you'll have that feeling.
Number 3, people trust people who they like. It's that simple.
We guarantee that if you show an interest in your buyer or seller and you talk to them and ask questions about their favorite subject,
Themselves.
that's right, that's everybody's favorite subject, that pretty soon they're going to warm right up to you. They're going to feel like you care and you're showing an interest and you're a great listener. And I'll tell you what, there's plenty of people out there who feel like nobody really listens to them.
And most of them are right.
Yeah, they may be right. So if questions come up about credibility or trust, that could be a good indicator that you haven't taken that time to show interest and build that rapport, build that bond of trust with them right in the beginning.
Now let's look at some techniques for building rapport.
Our first one is what we call mirroring. You have to determine early on in the call, just by listening to their voice and how they're speaking, you have to determine what we call our buyer or seller's W.
Understanding and urgency.
Different customers you talk to will have different understandings of real estate. For instance, if you're talking to an elderly person who doesn't really have much understanding of real estate, you would need to talk a little slower and explain things a little bit more simple terms. And the same would go if you're talking to a teenage first-time home buyer or someone who doesn't speak English as a first language.
But if you're like talking to another investor, he would be insulted if you spoke to him that way.
That's right. So you have to mirror the pace that they're speaking at, and urgency also applies to just how much of in a rush they are on that phone call. So if they have to be somewhere in a half an hour, but they're willing to take 10 minutes right now, you're going to get that sense by how quickly they talk. And you just talk at about the same pace of speech that they do, and you should be fine. Trust me though, I've been around enough action brains that if you're talking to an action brain and you're talking real slow, boy, you could lose a deal just by that. They'll get so impatient, they'll just say, forget it.
And vice versa. If you're talking to more of a thinker brain, I would know all about that. You want to slow it down a little bit and not talk too fast, or they're turned off by that.
That's true. So, and guys, if you are talking to another investor or a realtor, it's okay to use some jargon. In fact, you should use some jargon like lease purchase or some terminology, because it shows them that you know what you're talking about, builds your credibility.
But your normal everyday person, you don't want to use jargon. Our second technique for building rapport is to empathize with their situation.
That's when you're getting your buyer or seller to talk about themselves, and they might give you some information about a health concern or some concern with their kids.
And you say, I feel for you, I understand.
That's right. Or perhaps if they're going through a divorce or they're late on their mortgage and having financial problems, you can empathize by saying, oh, I've been there too, or my brother just went through that. That's always good. So they feel like you're really sympathizing with them and you're connecting with them on an emotional level. So that's an awesome technique for building rapport.
And our third technique for building rapport is to get the buyer or seller to talk about themselves by bringing up their favorite topic.
And there's a few guaranteed ones. Kids is number one. If you hear kids running around in the background hollering or playing, or especially if you hear them say, you kids be quiet over there. Everybody can empathize with that, and you say, oh, how old are your kids? That's always an easy question. Do you have boys or girls, or how many kids do you have? People love to talk about their kids.
And another trigger is if you hear a dog barking, you automatically know they have a pet. And
That's
you
right.
can say, oh, I have a little dog too. What's his name? And what kind of dog is it? And it's really easy to build rapport around pets as well.
Yes, pets is pets and kids. If you hear either one in the background, those are automatic. Our third topic that's great to use for building rapport is talking about their house. People love their house. They love to talk about their house. They love to talk about their kitchen. Just to ask them if their house has any special features. And this question comes up real logically as you're talking, because they expect you to ask questions about their house. So it's not even like you're trying to build rapport. You're just asking questions about their house. But get into it a little bit. Say, oh, have you done any home improvements? Or have you done any landscaping? Any special landscaping features that you've got? And those things really, if people have done those things, and this also gives you a reflection of what kind of a homeowner they've been, how much they've taken care of their house, and that's going to give you an indication of what kind of condition the house is in as well. So you're getting good information, plus you're building the rapport at the same time. The same thing goes with neighborhood. Everybody likes to talk about their neighborhood too. And sometimes if the neighborhood is, if they're real proud of their neighborhood, they can go on and on almost too much. But get them going on their neighborhood, and a lot of people will really light up.
And that will also lead into the overall state and area in which they live, especially if it's like California, certain states that are more transient, people coming and going. You can say, oh, how long have you lived in that state? And, further the communication that way.
Our sixth topic for building rapport is talking about the local sports teams. Now, if you live or work in an area where there's a lot of passion and a lot of support for the local sports teams. But I will say, obviously, this one's going to work a little better with men generally than with women.
Yes, and another really good topic is health. Now, be careful if you're talking to somebody who's elderly on the telephone and you bring up the health issue, it may go on and on and on for a while. So
another one is weather. So weather, obviously it's that instant kind of cliche topic, so we like to avoid it. You can't get real emotional or make a real connection talking about the weather usually, unless you've had some real crazy weather in the area lately, and then that's a good thing to talk about. Another great one is the day of the week. So if you're calling around on Friday, that's a good one.
That's right, TGIF.
That's right. If you're calling and you get a hold of somebody on a weekend,
you could always say, so what you up to this weekend?
That's right. Actually, Mondays can even be real good.
Oh, I hate Mondays, don't you?
Oh, I do. Even hump day.
Okay, I'm not even going to touch that one.
Our 10th topic for building rapport is holidays. If there's been a recent holiday or a holiday is approaching, you can always ask, especially Christmas or Thanksgiving, obviously big holidays, but even 4th of July or Valentine's Day, you can get into some real interesting conversations with people about holidays.
Now, I love talking about work. If you say, so what do you do for a living? And you go, oh, my uncle or aunt does that. And isn't that industry kind of tough right now? Or, I mean, work is just an excellent way to get communication going.
And our last topic for building great rapport, number 12, is marriage. If you've got a married couple there, you can always ask the husband and wife if they do special things together or how long they've been married. That's obviously a great one, especially if you've got an elderly couple. Oh, how long have you two guys been married? That's a great one. So, and if you have a real young couple, how long have you guys been married? Another really great one for married couples is, oh, how did you guys meet?
Yes.
Or where did you meet?
That's
People
a great
love
one.
to tell that story of how they met. So, and even if it's romantic or not, they always love to tell that story. So that's a good one you can make a real connection on. So all these different techniques for building rapport are so important, and they're so easy, and yet people overlook them, and they make deals so much harder than they have to be, and they don't enjoy themselves as much either, because you want to work with people that you like as well. And if you take a couple minutes to build rapport, you'll find not only does your customer like you, and that makes everything easier, you also like your customers too, and that makes everything a real pleasure.
The third step to making killer closing calls is verify the information. Now you want to just confirm their address and their house size, the square footage, etc.
And also you want to verify their lot size, how big of a lot they have. Both house size, square footage, interior, and the lot size are very important for the value of the property. And also don't forget, now we have this, we're the only ones I've ever seen who have this on their forms, is what does the house back up to? Because you don't want to drive out to a house that backs up to the freeway and you didn't realize it, because that's going to really reduce the price greatly. So that's another important question to ask before you actually drive out there. And another thing you need to verify is the house condition and the upgrades. Is the house in good condition? How old is it? That's an important question too a lot of times. And if they have done any home improvements or upgrades.
Yes, and then next you would verify the mortgage information. Do they have a first mortgage, a second mortgage, a third mortgage? What's the PITI, principal, interest, property taxes, insurance? Mortgage information is very important.
That's right, especially if you're doing pretty house deals, but on all deals, you want to try to get that mortgage information.
And the last thing you need to verify is the numbers of the deal.
So you want to make sure that you know how much they're asking. This is where you want to know if the house has been listed, what it was listed at, if they've had any appraisals on it, what the appraisal came in at, what their asking price is. That's the things that you need to determine to make sure that you have a deal and going forward into the next step. Now the next step is the crucial step, and this is the information right here, the numbers of the deal you absolutely must have to move to the next step.
And number 4 for making killer closing calls is close the deal.
That's right, and the first step of that is explaining the deal. Just explaining the terms, how it's going to work, what's happening with the mortgage for pretty house deals, whatever the ins and outs of the particular deal that you're talking about with that seller or buyer, you need to explain everything. Now, I will warn you though, you want to explain up to a certain degree, but you don't want to give a seminar on how this deal works. You explain it in simple terms and then you move on. If they have questions, that's fine, you address the questions, but you give them as much information as they need to make the decision and no more, because then if you give them too much, you end up raising more questions than you actually answer.
Number 2 on closing the deal is negotiating the price and terms.
And that's going to be different for every house that you buy, depending on the house and the individual seller or buyer's situation. So every deal you do is going to have a little bit different numbers.
Right.
But what you want to do is when you're talking to a seller, here's some key words for you. You always say, what's the least? Okay, so what's the least amount of cash you need to move on, or always what's the least?
And when you're talking to the buyer, it's always what's the most?
That's right. What's the most you can afford to put down on your beautiful new home? So that's how you work it, with the least and the most, and you end up with the most in your pocket. Make sure you answer all their questions and objections right on the closing call, because you don't want to be driving out to people's houses if you don't even have a deal. Our what to say system can really help you with that. Number 4 on closing the deal is if it's necessary to raise the seller or buyer's comfort level to a certain point, you can take them step by step through the process of how the deal is going to work. Now, I never do this unless they obviously, as you're speaking to them, you sense that their comfort level isn't where it needs to be. And that's when you would take them step by step and actually guide them a little bit more how this deal is going to work for them. And obviously, all along the way, you're showing a lot of enthusiasm. This is great, as you're explaining how the deal actually works.
Now, if they're asking about your credibility, you would want to give your website. That's the perfect objection answer for the thinker brain.
So if they start asking questions like, how long have you been around, or how do I know you're going to make my payments, or anything that relates to them being able to trust you, you look so professional, and you probably get more credit than it actually should get for having a website, because it's not very hard to get a website. But if you get a website and you can just say, well, check out my website, you give them your website address, that is like a shutdown objection answer. Usually that answers that and it doesn't come up again, and they will go and check out your website. And I'll tell you what, even if they don't go and check out your website, just them knowing you have a website gives them a new sense of comfort, and more of a comfort level with doing the deal with you, because you seem more professional.
Websites are great. The 5th step to making killer closing calls is set the appointment. Now, you want to set this appointment as soon as possible, like in an hour or 2 or sometime that day. The sooner the better.
That's right. Time is of the essence with that. You want to get out there and get that deal wrapped up and get it on paper. A bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush, as they say. And also, if they're having trouble setting an appointment time and they're kind of waffling, you don't want to have them say, gee, I got to go talk to my husband or something like that. Get the appointment time lined up, and make sure they have your number. In case that doesn't work, they can call you back. But if they're going back and forth, just give them a choice. Say, well, 2 o'clock would work out for me, or 4 o'clock. Which would work better for you?
Always give a choice. And the last step to making killer closing calls is sign off with enthusiasm.
Now, it may be tempting at that point to rehash the numbers. Resist that temptation. It's been decided. Just make sure that either your buyer or seller has the right expectations. So make sure you set their expectations properly. Make sure, for instance, if it's a seller, they understand that you're going out there to buy their house that day and get the paperwork signed. So make sure they understand what the deal meeting is going to be all about. Beyond that, you want to be saying consistently and constantly, this is going to work out great for everybody. So that's one of my favorite lines that I use all the time is, boy, this is going to work out so great for you guys. It's going to work out good for us. This is really going to work out great.
And of course, you want to end the call with congratulations to the seller or buyer. They've just sold their home or they just bought a home.
So now we've gone through the steps and all the underlying secrets of making killer closing calls.